Hey guys, welcome to the show. Today I have a very special guest, Josh Loper. I'm really excited about his story. Again, this is another story of someone who God saved out of the homosexual life. And uh, his story is particularly relevant to me in a certain way. So it's very, very exciting. I'm so glad this has happened to Josh. And so I'm anxious to hear his story. Welcome, Josh.
Hey Becket, how are you?
Good to see you. I'm
Good to see
so
you.
excited to talk about your story. Um, it's amazing. Like I just love when, especially because, I mean, I talk about this all the time. Like this issue, LGBTQ or whatever, gay, whatever, is such a stumbling block to people for coming, especially now in culture, to come to Christ. So um, I just when I hear these stories, I'm just like so excited and blown away by God's mercy and His grace. And so, tell us. Okay, let's start off with your family. You grew up in a Christian home, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And
Um,
you grew up in the church.
yes. Yeah. My grandparents took us to church every week. And when we were younger, it was me, my older brother, and my older sister. And my grandparents would take us every week. Sunday, I think Wednesday nights then as well, when we were that young. So yeah, the church was growing up, and then moving forward, growing up. I
But
ended
and
up
you like? Did you like the church? I mean, did you like going to church when you were a kid?
Yeah, I think for the most part I did. They did have to force us there a few times when we were younger. But I did eventually grow into it. I think it was probably around middle school where it kind of became I took it and it became my own. Where I was more uh, wanting to go opposed to them making us go. Um, but yeah, and then my sister, as I said, was a couple years older than me, so she had a lot of really great things to say about the church and the youth group that she was in at the time. And whenever I got into, whenever I got old enough into, I think it was sixth grade, I was super excited to get into the youth group and to be involved like she was. Um,
And you
and
were
yeah,
and
I mean,
you continued being involved in the youth group and through high school as well, right?
yeah, yeah. So like really, really involved. It was my second home. Loved it, loved everything about it, loved the community, loved the people. And I also, I led worship. I was on the praise team. I was in the choir. Eventually, I want to say when I was a little older, like my junior or senior year of high school, I started teaching drama for the youth group. We did some skits and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, we did missions trips. We were very active, and not only outside of the community, but also within the community. And I loved every part of it. No bad memories, no nothing. It was great.
And so was it during high school that you started to when did you start to realize you had same-sex attraction?
So that was, I feel like that was a little earlier than high school. Maybe seventh or eighth grade is whenever I noticed that I had some guy friends that I felt. Um, a little more than like I wanted a little bit more than friends with them. Um,
And
so so
was it stressful? Was it like kind of stressful for you to have those feelings, especially being a part of a church and all that? Was it How did you deal with
I,
that?
yeah, I don't think so then. Not when I was that young. I think when I was in high school, when I got a little older, it definitely became stressful and more complicated. Um, because I was in the church and like I said, like I was there two, three times a week, I mean, it was very active. Like I said, it was my second home. Um, so yeah, for a long time, I just kind of told myself that it was a phase and it was just kind of something that I was going through. I also had a really I developed an addiction to pornography during this time as well, through high school, and um, as I think that was developing, it slowly switched to just me watching men, and all of that was just behind the scenes, in private, and
Hmm.
then I think so it was hard for me, especially in high school, to admit that this was more than just a phase. So in that way, I guess it was really stressful because I was still trying to kind of balance or juggle, um, from what I've learned all my life in church, and these desires, and also, this attraction that I didn't really completely understand. Um, but of course, on the other side, I was feeding it with, pornography in the dark. So that didn't help either. But yeah, as far as my attractions, and it was pretty stressful. Yeah, you could say that.
And I think in high school you had an accountability partner, and he asked you why you were looking at basically like male pornography, gay porn.
Yeah, there was some accountability software, then, and he was my best friend, going through high school, and he was also in the youth group, and yeah, it sent him a couple of times. I think it emailed him saying that, I was looking at something that I shouldn't be. And the first time he was just kind of like, I think he didn't really know what to think, or how to address that situation really. Um, but he did come up to me and talk to me about it, and he said, hey, I noticed that this happened. Is everything all right? Do you want to talk about anything? And then he was like, well, okay, I was like, everything, is fine. No, I just had a weak moment or whatever. And then he was like, well, I just kind of wanted to talk to you because it did show me, it showed me that you were looking at men. And I just kind of I threw it, I just kind of like shrugged it off. I was just like, oh, I think that was like a pop-up or a virus, or, something that just like comes up. I think
Hmm.
that was the excuse back then anyway with anything like that. Um, and then I think he was like, okay, he was just like, all right, well, if you ever need to talk, let me know. And then it happened again. And I kind of went with the same story. And I don't really think that he believed me that time. Um, but also, like, we just didn't, I don't think he also knew what to do. He didn't know how to
Yeah.
talk to me about it, because as awkward as it was for me, for him to know that, he must have felt just as awkward to talk to me about that, because obviously, I know that he would want to be there, as my friend. But I don't know if he necessarily knew how to be my friend at that point,
Was he the first
in that
person?
situation.
Yeah, was he the first person in your life who kind of found out that you were same sex attracted?
That's a good question. I think maybe so. Yeah, I think maybe so. At least to the point to where there was some weight to it. I think earlier than that, I may have gotten caught, like, but it wasn't anything crazy, or you know anything that seemed like a huge issue.
Yeah.
Um, like, I'm just thinking like little, like, underwear models, or like looking at underwear models or something like that. Not fully, like hardcore all in,
Yeah.
but is kind of what I mean by that.
Okay. And then you go away to college and you start working in a restaurant, and you worked with a lot of gay guys, and they all, and the manager as well. I guess the manager too was saying like, when are you going to come out? When are you going to come out? Like they all kind of were pressuring you to come out. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's really strange being on this side and looking back at everything. I really can just see how the enemy was attacking me.
Hmm.
I feel like early on, especially through that high school, and right out of high school, right before I came out, those moments, because all through that time I still had everything, I still had the church right there. So I was being fed spiritually constantly, um, which I think enabled me to push all these other desires back and still like pump the brakes on all of that. Um, but but yeah, through high school, it was really strange. I had a few people, which I've always been a little different, and I was in the band, and I wasn't very, into sports and stuff like that. So, but it was still strange. I mean, I wasn't the only guy there, you know what I mean? So it was a little strange. I did have three or four people come up to me in high school, and they were like, why don't you? Because I was dating a girl too at the time, and they were like, well, why don't you just, when are you going to break up with your girlfriend and come out the closet already? And or
Mm.
they would offer me to like invite me over after school and like hang out or whatever. And then also when I was working, I was working with a couple of guys, and my manager I developed a really good friendship with, and he would also, be in my ear the whole time, just with stuff like that and comments like that. And the whole time he knew, and everybody at school knew that like I was in the church, I was very active in the church. So it was a direct like, we don't care what you say you believe, but we're telling you that this is really who you are, and the church is just trying to, prevent you from being who you really are, um,
Yeah.
and that was
Yeah.
essentially how it was phrased.
Yeah. I mean, uh, it's kind of like the moment where you're like, "Get behind me, Satan!"
Yeah.
It's because, like, the gays can be relentless with it. Because I experienced that too growing up, and it wasn't so much people were saying that to me. It was more like, actually, yeah, in college, I had my best friend in college. This he was quote unquote gay, and he decided to come out. And this was back in the days where it was very taboo to come out, like it was not
Mm,
accepted in society. And he wanted me to come out with him, like he wanted me to come out as well. And I'm like, and it freaked me out. And I basically we our friendship ended because he was pressuring me to come out. So I know, I mean, I know, and then when I moved to LA, it's like everyone, all like it's kind of like groups of guys that I hung out with. It was always this sort of thing, like when is Anderson Cooper going to come out? When is so and so going to come out? Like it's always this kind of like push for people to come out. It's a really weird
hmm.
phenomenon. So I
Yeah.
understand that weird kind of pressure. Um, but then you met a guy in your biology class, and then that's when I think you got into a relationship for the first. Is that your first relationship?
Yeah, so that was in college. So I graduated high school, and I went to college locally. So I was still living at home and driving to class every day. And I was working, actually, one of those gay guys that I was working with at the time, he's really good friends with this guy that I had in my biology class. And I noticed that this guy was kind of looking at me, a little too long. And but I also kind of just noticed him, but this is when the curiosity really started and kicked in. I think I saw him as the first person who I could pursue. I was definitely attracted to him, and all the things that came in with that, the excitement, the attention, and like I said, I just felt like he was kind of the first person that I was able to pursue. And so
And you
yeah,
felt, you say, I think you said you felt like free for the first time, or you felt really free, like the lid came off and you could just be yourself.
yeah, it was more when I came out. That was more when I came out,
Oh,
because I
okay.
just feel like I had, yeah, I feel like I had all this, because all of this, these same-sex attractions were all in the background for me, and church was always in the forefront for me,
Yeah.
and whenever when I came out, it was like all this pressure from all these people coming at me, telling me, asking me when I was going to come out, and it was like I was fighting that back, and I had been fighting that desire back for so long that when I finally came out, it's like it switched. It was like my same-sex attractions went, and they took priority. And my church life and my spiritual life, now I'm going to push that in the background.
Right.
And yeah, it was very freeing. I felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. I felt like all these questions that I had for so long, like why I was attracted to guys and why I was feeling this, way towards guys. Not that those questions were actually answered, but me acting on them, it was like a relief. It was like yeah, like a weight just lifted off my shoulders. And
And
I
so
did. I felt free.
what did you think about God? So God was just kind of like you just pushed God aside, sort of, and you didn't think about him anymore.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I wrestled with that for sure. I just think it was one of those things where I didn't know how it fit. I didn't know how it all fit together. Because this was also just there was so much about, I don't know if Lady Gaga had released her Born This Way song at this point yet, but it was but
Oh
like that
gosh.
message was there, and
Oh
that
yeah.
message and that mentality was definitely there. So me thinking that I was born this way, but also knowing that God created me, I didn't understand how to figure that out. And I didn't understand how that all fit together. Um, so yeah, my church life, eventually everyone in church found out. And so, my youth pastor and some others, they reached out to me, and, I went and met a couple of them and sat and talked with them because, they just had questions. And even by that point, I had so many walls built up. By the time I had come out, it was like my mind was made up and nobody could tell me anything different. It was just like, and I think a lot of that too was just being raised in the church. I was like, you know what? I've tried this for so many years, and let me see what's going on over here. Let me see this.
Yeah.
There may be another way to live. Let me see. Um, Kind of broaden my perspective, and because it felt freeing.
And did your mother know at this point?
She did, yeah, eventually, yeah, and and what's funny about that is I was so open. I felt like I was so open about that, and I wanted her to ask me questions, and I wanted, because she was like, I'm just kind of confused, because for a lot of people, everyone around me, really, it happened overnight for them,
Yeah.
and so yeah, she had a lot of questions, and I definitely invited that. Her and I have always had a really close relationship, so I wanted her to ask me questions, and I was and also around this time, you know, it was such a big like a mission, I think, in the gay community to be like, we need to prove to everyone that we are just like everyone else, that we can be just as successful as everyone else. We can have families just like everyone else. We can get married
Hmm.
just like everyone else. So my whole mindset with all of that was just like, I'm the same person, you know? So I wanted her to ask me questions because I wanted to prove to her that I was the same person. And that the only thing that had changed is that, I'm not going to date a girl now, and looking back, I can see in so many ways that I was not the same person at all. Um,
Yeah. Did you
and
ever
an
consider?
example,
Go ahead.
just an example of that is just how many walls were built up, and I just couldn't, I couldn't see past all of that, to really see who I was or how I was acting and how I was being.
And so, was there any point where you were considering going to a gay affirming church, like a rainbow flag church?
Yeah. No, I've been asked that, and
Good for you.
I know it's, it's so strange though, because being so active in the church growing up, looking back, I would be like, well, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I pursue that a little bit more? I definitely had those. I definitely thought about doing it. I thought about finding a church, um, and just seeing what it was all about. Um, but I took I think I took that church community that I had growing up and I kind of placed it in the LGBT community. It's because I was on the Pride board. I was very active in different areas of the gay community in Savannah. So I think that kind of um, gave me that community I was looking for. So I didn't really pursue the church community after I came out. But also, I don't know if I wonder too if I was subconsciously trying to prevent myself from learning that the truth behind it all, because I think, I don't know. Looking back, you can always say that you would notice something that's wrong, but I don't know if I would be able to balance seeing God and me being gay just was too hard to kind of understand, and because of everything that I had been taught growing up. Um, So maybe that's why I didn't really pursue it. I couldn't really see, I didn't see a bridge for that
Right.
gap, you know.
You couldn't reconcile the two things. Like that's how I felt too. I completely left God behind when I moved. Well, when I went off to college, really, but definitely after college when I moved to Tokyo and then to LA, God wasn't even on my radar because I was just focused on pursuing my career, but also pursuing my new like life as a gay man in Los Angeles. And so God wasn't even something I thought about. And but
Yeah.
then in Savannah, and this is very similar. We have similar stories in terms of this, but I think you dated four different guys, but it was always kind of the same pattern, and it always sort of like ended the same way. Like, talk about that.
Yeah. So my whole time in Savannah, I was in Savannah for probably 12 years, 10 or 12 years. And I dated four guys in that time, and they all lasted around 2 years, with the exception of one. And we dated for about four. But the last 2 years were kind of off and on. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, so I noticed that there was just like looking back, I noticed that there's just a cyclical nature to all of this in my patterns in Savannah for those 10 or 12 years that I was there. I treated every relationship the same. We went into it, we were all high hopes, excited, had a really great time. And then, 8 months, 8 months
Yeah.
to a year, it was like things just kind of started falling apart, and
Yep.
not overnight, but just slowly things just started falling apart. And, you know, I was a bartender, so alcohol was flowing, and there was lots of insecurities with all of that. And I mean, every single relationship ended the same. It was fighting, insecurities, a lot of drinking. Um, so yeah, looking back, it's kind of interesting to see that, because they all did
Yeah.
last around the same time.
I know. I mean, that's kind of my story too. I had I think five serious relationships in at Los Angeles, and one right before LA. But they all had the kind of a 2 year shelf life. Like for me,
Hmm.
that was like the shelf life was 2 years, and I have a lot of friends old friends who um, have been in very long term relationships with guys, but there's always a catch. Uh,
Yeah.
I have like two of my old friends are married, two guys, they're married, they have kids, but they have a completely open relationship.
Hmm.
So there's no fidelity. It's not a true relationship. First of all, it's not a true relationship because it's homosexual. But
Right.
anyway, it's just there's like so much kind of cheating and infidelity. It doesn't. So that's in my mind, in my experience, I'll say, in my experience, that's one of the main reasons why a lot of gay relationships last longer is when they have an open relationship. So yeah, but the 2 year shelf life It's very common, very, very common.
Yeah.
And you're right, because like every relationship I was, as you know, every relationship I was in, it's like, oh, this guy's he's the one. This is the. I mean, those other guys were. I thought they were the one, but this guy's really going to be the one. And then you're right. Like after 6 months, kind of like you start to really see the problems come up, and then after a year, it's like there's like a lot of kind of bickering and stuff. And then the second year is just like it's kind of a downward slide, and you're and then it's over. So
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with that cycle. But you say that when in Savannah, the gay community in Savannah is so strong, like that's when it really became your full identity, right?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier that I think I took my church background community and I kind of forced that mold onto the gay community in Savannah. So I was all in, you know. It's kind of what I was used to. We did volunteers work, we did all kinds of similar things, not the same things, but similar things. And I wanted to be active. I wanted to help out. And yeah, and the scene in Savannah is pretty small, you know? I mean, so everybody knows everybody. And same with my with work, I with the restaurants, and it was kind of like a small town feel. Like I feel like I could walk next door to another restaurant or bar and I would be able to get a job because everybody just kind of knows who you are. They know your work ethic. And it's the same with the gay community. Everybody knows who you are. They know who you're dating. They know, who you've been with. They know everything, and so it just kind of became my stomping grounds, I guess. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun until it wasn't.
Yeah,
Um,
and then I think you
I
had this moment. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was towards the end of my time in Savannah. I want to say probably the last 3 years. I think I can probably confidently say the last 3 years of my time in Savannah. I was dating this guy, the guy that I dated longer than all the others. He really he really messed me up. Our relationship really ended horribly, and it took me a long time to get over that. And I ended up drinking a lot because of that, as a result of that. And I ended up getting a DUI in that time, just making really poor decisions. And
Mm,
yeah, I began to know, like I was drinking, 5, 6 nights a week, and it wasn't like a drink here or one or two there. It was like I was getting drunk every single night for 5 or 6 nights a week. Again, I was working in the bar, so it was really easy for me to do that.
yeah.
I was running the bar at the time, so I wasn't even, just me being there didn't mean I really had to do too much. It was just more so overseeing everything. So it was really easy for me to do that, and I, I, that's what I did, and I ended up meeting someone, and we started dating. Um, but all through that time, it was just very toxic. I just remember feeling like I kept telling myself I've outgrown Savannah because it's very party heavy, and the gay community there is even more so party heavy. It's very touristy. It's like all the things that you do in Savannah really just revolve around a bar. Um, and I was getting tired of it, and I was seeing that it was not good for me. I wasn't happy. I worked at a nightclub for about a year, and it was literally like I never saw the sunlight. I worked at night. I worked till 3 or 4 in the morning, and then I slept all day, and then I walked back in at work at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and I worked in a basement with no windows. So it was just like that whole time at the end of my time in Savannah was just dark, like physically
Mm.
and spiritually. Um,
And I
but
think
yeah,
you
and
said that at a certain point, I don't know when this was, but you said that you went home, and I don't know if this was before. I don't know when this was, but it is. You said it was the worst day of your life. What was that about?
Yeah, so that I think it was my first boyfriend. So this was like shortly after I came out. We hadn't been dating too long, but things were rocky already. And we had had an argument or about something, and I was like, I can't do this, and I just went back home. Um, and yeah, it was not a good night. I don't think I lasted the night. I didn't last the night, because the pain was just too much. Me to turn back, and away from him and to go back home. One, to go back home is something that I told myself once I came out that I would never do. I was like, I'm just never going to go back home. That's not an option for me. And I think a lot of that comes or came from just me thinking that I had to prove, and that we as the gay community had to prove that we're no different than anyone else and we're actually better than everybody else. So for
Yeah.
me to I made it a point to make sure that I was independent. I made it a point to make sure that I was never going to go back home. Um, so for me to do that was difficult, but being there, it felt like I was turning my back on everything I knew to be true about me.
Mm.
So I couldn't even stay the night. I cried the entire time I was there. My mom was there, and she was trying to, like, she didn't really know. I don't know if she even knew what was happening. She just knew that I was in pain and having a hard time. And you know, I I know she was wanting me to stay, you know,
Hmm.
because she knew that this life wasn't for me. And but I couldn't do it. I lasted a few hours, and I walked out the door, and I remember, I grabbed my things and I walked out the door. I remember my mom was sitting at the dining room table, and the door was right next to the table, and she just looked up at me, and I don't know if I told her but I definitely thought it, and I was just like, I just can't do this. I was just like, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I can't stay here. I can't leave that life. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I can't do it. And I walked out the door, and when that door shut, there was like a finality to it. It was like, okay, without a doubt, I am on this path. I've chosen to pursue this, and there's no turning back.
Yeah. And then what? And in 2020, you moved to Atlanta from Savannah. So why did you move to Atlanta?
Yeah, so like I said, in the last couple of years that I was in Savannah, I did meet another guy, and we started dating. And with everything going on in Savannah, me feeling like it was toxic and just, drinking way too much all the time, he got an opportunity to transfer up to Atlanta. And he asked how I felt about that. And, I was like, yeah, let's go. I felt like Savannah couldn't offer me anything more. Atlanta isn't too far from Savannah, so my family is around that area. So I was like, yeah, let's move to Atlanta. I can bartend anywhere. So yeah, let's go.
And then COVID hits.
Yes, so that that was in January whenever we moved, and stressful enough. I've never really lived in a city like that, and I had a harder time finding a job because it wasn't like, small town Savannah. I couldn't walk into the next restaurant and grab a job. So it was kind of a learning curve for me a little bit. Um, but yeah, COVID hit in March, and then so all that work I took to find a job, I got laid off of that job. Like, I don't think even a month after I had it, because of COVID. But this is like part of the time where everything just started being getting scary. COVID
Hmm.
was scary in general. But I just remember a lot of thoughts of, like, what's going to happen, when the world ends, or is the world ending? Like, what's going to happen, and what does that mean for me? And that's a lot of these kind of scary thoughts started popping up in my head around this time, around, yeah, 2020.
And so you during that time when you were like, what's going to happen? Or, am I going to die? Is it the end of the world? Did God enter your mind again, or was that still off the table?
Yeah, I don't think so. I always kept a good communication, open line of communication with my mom and my sister. Actually, we have like a group thread together, and over the years we had always, just text each other. So through this time, we are still texting each other, and my mom would send me, different sermons to listen to, and just different articles to read, or whatever is going on, and or just saying, we love you and we're praying for you, and just kind of stuff like that. So at that point, her and a random, text from my grandpa every now and then were kind of the only godly influence in my life.
Yeah.
Um, but I still think I was just so I just had all those walls built up so much with my life and connecting that to God. I I didn't really see that as the answer, you know. I still saw that as, well, that's a possibility and that might work for someone else, but it's just not my answer, you know. And like I said, whenever I walked out that door that one time, like I was determined to make this work. Um, so yeah, I mean, there may have been little thoughts of that, but it just wasn't, I just kept saying that wasn't for me. That's not for me.
And then so in 2021, you went to Savannah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but July 4th, 2021, you went to Savannah with your boyfriend, and you told your mom you were coming for the weekend and you wanted to stop by. But tell us what happened when that, tell us that story.
Yeah, actually, I think it was 2022. But
Okay.
yeah, in July 4th weekend, um, I also something what we were planning this trip to go to Savannah. My boyfriend at the time had not gone to Savannah. Um, so I was like, we have a few days off work. Let's just go. It won't be super expensive. It'll be a nice trip, whatever. And yeah, I share my location with my mom, and I knew that she would see that I was in Savannah. So I didn't want her to see that I was there and me not reach out, because that would hurt her feelings. So I was like, okay, I can either do that, or I can kind of talk to her beforehand. And I ended up reaching out to her and just saying, hey, we're going to go down for the weekend. We're going to come back. I'm going to come back to Atlanta on Sunday. I would love to meet with you. I'd love to see you, if you have some time. And I said, but just so you know, my boyfriend is going to be with me. And
How did she respond?
yeah, she didn't respond immediately. It took her a minute. I think a couple of days. Um, it took her, and she just eventually, she was just like, she said, I'm so sorry. She said, I just don't feel very comfortable with that. She also felt that I was putting her on the spot,
Mm.
with that. And it's something I didn't ever do. That was the first time I kind of did it that way. She had met some of my boyfriends in the past, but it wasn't like that. And yeah, so that just didn't happen. And I was like, okay, that's fine. No big deal. I tried to make it seem like it didn't bother me. Um, and we did our little trip, and then we came back. And
And your mom basically, she didn't really, you guys didn't talk for a couple of months, but then your mom finally reaches out to you and wants to have lunch. So what happened at that lunch?
yeah, well, I'll need to say too that during this time in Atlanta, the cyclical pattern that I've noticed in Savannah of my work and relationships, it was like whenever I was in Atlanta, it was like on a fast track. So I was doing the same things in my work life. I started as a server, worked my way up as a bar manager. I did that for a little while, and then I got complacent, and then I had to go search for something else because I got bored. And same with my relationships. It was just, well, I had two in Atlanta, but it was kind of the same thing. Everything was really good, and then it wasn't. Um, The second relationship in Atlanta is who I went with to Savannah for July 4th. Um, but also in all of this time, I'm still thinking of all those questions, just like, um, what's going to happen? What happens when I die?
Mm,
And what happens if the world ends? And all these questions, they were keeping me up at night. I was so scared about
mm,
these things, and no one around me, my friend group around me, nobody could answer these questions. And they would tell me, but one of the answers that sticks out to me is just, like, we don't remember who we were before we were born, so why would we remember who we are when we die, or what happens when we die?
mhm,
And I just remember me asking those questions and getting those answers, and I'm just like, that's just not good enough. Like, that's not
mhm,
good enough for me. There, it has to be more than that. There has to be more than this. And so yeah, my mom reached out to me after not talking for a few months, and she was like, let's have lunch. Um, and I said, okay, let's sit down and have lunch. And we did, and she started asking me these same kind of questions that I've been stressing out over and, losing sleep over. She just started asking me like, well, what happens what do you think happens? Because at this point, her and I have never really talked about specifics with my life,
mhm,
and how I felt about the life I was living, and how my church background, fit into all of that, or, we hadn't dug into any of those things at this point. So
mhm.
this was kind of the first time after, and man, this was 15 years that I had been out. Um, so when we sat, she started just asking these questions, and it wasn't like she was judging me, or it wasn't like she was, angry or anything like that. It was like she was curious. She just
Yeah.
was curious about where my head was, and where, how I was thinking about these things. So she started asking me these same questions that were keeping me up at night with, where are you going to go when you die, and what happens when the world ends? And, I looked at her, and I told her, I was like, Mom, I'm not really sure, but I know that I'm a good person. And yeah,
That old
and
trick, yeah.
right, right. And because the community tells you that. That's what everybody in the community says. Whenever you get to a certain point with these conversations, it's like, I don't really know. I'm not worried about those specifics, but I just know that I'm a good person.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been told for 15 years. And whenever I told her that, we both just kind of looked at each other, and I just remember it falling flat. It was like we both knew that that just wasn't a good answer. Like, it just didn't mean anything. It's like, okay, well, whatever you have to tell yourself to make you feel better, and it just fell flat, and that was such an eye opener for me. And that, sitting down with her really started getting the ball rolling with all of this. And she, we hugged, and we kind of made up from the trip that I wasn't able to see her. And
Yeah.
whenever we left, she asked me if there was anything I needed, if everything was all right, and I told her that I had my eye on some work shoes, some boots, and she was like, "Well, send me the information. I'll get them for you." Because at this point, it was October, so Christmas was right around the corner. She was like, "I just want to do something nice for you." I said, "Okay." Cool. So I sent her all the information. She ordered the boots, and they came in. And when I was trying them on, I remember we were texting back and forth, and I think I called her, and um, we were just kind of talking about just different things. And she asked me to do her a favor. She was like, I just got you these, and she was like, I didn't get you these for so that I would get anything in return, but will you just do me a favor, and will you just ask God for 30 days? Will you ask God to reveal himself to you? Um,
Wow.
and she said, or I said, I was like, yeah, of course. Like, I just, in my mind, as soon as she said that, I was like, of course I'll do that. Like, it's not going to change anything. It's not going to do anything. So sure, yeah, I'll do that for you. Thank you so much, for the boots, and, Merry Christmas, that was kind of my attitude towards it. And She also, around this time, she had sent me a book, and she said, "Listen, I read through this book, and it was really eye-opening for me." And she said, I'm going to send this book to you, and I want us to read it together." And she presented it in a way that, I mean, I'm a mama's boy, and I guess she knows that I'll do anything that she asks me to do, because um, she was like, I think that this will help our relationship, is kind of how she phrased it. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, cool. That sounds good to me, And then the book came, and then I think you're familiar with it, Beckett.
What is the book?
It's it's called A Change of Affection,
Oh,
by
I know that
Becket
book.
Cook. Yeah, yeah.
That's my book. Um,
Yeah.
so did
So
you and what happened? So did you read the book? I mean, obviously you read the book, right?
yeah, so I read the title, and I was like, oh goodness, A Gay Man's Journey, and I was just like, okay, now I know what this is, and I kind of just threw it off to the side. No offense.
I'm not
But
offended.
I kind of just threw it off to the side. And so I was thinking about this prayer, and I did it a few times. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I was like, I still with, I feel like I was rolling my eyes the entire time. I just like, still with that mentality, like this is not going to change anything. Um, And I remember looking myself in the mirror 3 times, and I just said, God, will you reveal yourself to me? And I stood there for a minute. And then I left and did whatever, went to work or whatever I was doing that day. And then I kind of just forgot about it. Um, but these questions, they just kept coming up, and they were still keeping me up at night. And I still wasn't getting any good answers for these questions. And I don't know exactly when it was, but I was in the shower, getting ready for work, and I just remember thinking at one point that, man, what if these questions that I cannot seem to shake, what if this is God trying to reveal himself to me?
Mm,
And when that thought came into my mind, when that realization kind of set in, I just knew, there was a certainty about that. I was just like,
mhm.
wow. I said, okay. And then let me kind of I backed up a little bit. And so then I was like, okay, well, let me look into this book. Let me read this book. And so I started reading the book, and it just completely broke me. Um, all those walls that I had built up for so long, it was like, you know, I think back, and it's like God was already changing and softening my heart through this whole time in Atlanta, because just for me to pick up that book in the first place, and not only to read it but to accept it as truth, you
Mm,
know because over the years I had I we you hear in the gay community of different people who have lived that life, and then they become a Christian, and then they're different. So I had heard of these stories before, but we would always just mock them or just laugh them off and not really paying them any attention. So, and that's kind of what I was doing when I first read the title of your book, and I threw it off to the side. I was just like, yeah, right, whatever. And so for me to be able to pick that up and to open it up, I mean, I can already see how God had just softened so much of my heart just to be able to do that and to start reading that. And man, whenever I got into it, I don't think it was very long into it, but there was a scripture in there. It was it was First Corinthians 1:18 through 21. Um And it said, well, really, it was just 18 that got my attention. It says, the message of the cross is foolish to those who are headed for destruction, but we who are being saved know it is the very power of God. And Beckett, when I read that, it was like everything that I had been told the past 15 years, like I was talking about earlier with, we have to prove all of this about the gay community. Along with that mindset was everyone who is against us they just aren't educated. They just don't know what
Mhm.
they're talking about. They're so stuck in the past. They're worried about change. They're scared of change, and they're ignorant and they just need more education. So like for 15 years, that's just kind of my mindset whenever I came across somebody who didn't agree with the way I was living. So whenever I read that and it just said that, the person the words of God are going to be foolish to the unbeliever, essentially,
Yeah.
I was just like, wow, it was like my whole perspective just flipped. Um and it was like all those walls were just breaking, and then the dominoes started and all the pieces just started fitting together. And like I said, I started reading your book, and it was like I was accepting it as truth. And yeah, it was amazing. And then also I just kept I remember, along with that, to help confirm, I think, for me, that I was in the right direction or going in the right direction, is that it was brought to my memory the narrow road.
Uh-huh.
In Matthew, talking about the narrow road, 7:13, it says, you can enter God's kingdom only through the narrow gate. The highway to hell is broad and its gate is wide for the many who choose that way. But the gateway to
Yeah.
life is very narrow and the road is difficult, and only a few ever find it. So it was like, just to further confirm, because I was just like, man, it seems so easy right now to be living this life. So I just saw that clear as day as a broad gate.
Yeah.
And for me to sit there and start diving into, because the second part of your book is all scripture based, um questions that people have asked you over the years, and then you answer with biblical truths. So like diving into that kind of study, which I'd never been exposed to in the 15 years that I'd been living that life, I was just seeing so clearly that, like, this is it, this is the path. And I didn't have a lot figured out, but I knew that I had to leave. I knew that I had to get out.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened. Eventually, I guess not a lot of time passed, but I did. I called up my mom and I was like, "Hey, I just need to go home. Is there room, can you guys have me?" And I mean, she was just over the moon excited. And we set a
The
date.
prodigal son is coming home.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was like, and then I was still just trying to control the entire thing. I just feel I was so stubborn. Um, because I was just like, well, there's still a few things that I need to figure out first. I have two jobs at this point. I'm like, I need to work out my notice. I need to make sure I don't burn any bridges. And I have a lease. My lease doesn't end until the end of April. I was like, so let me just kind of stay here until then, and then I can just figure some things out, and we'll make a plan. And she was super nice. She was just like, okay, I won't forget, like, let's do this, and I'm gonna hold you to that. And I had broken up with my boyfriend at the time, and I had a date planned with him, kind of like a follow up, because we had broken up 4 times in our relationship, so it wasn't really anything new to break up.
Mhm.
Um, so I went over to his house. It was a Sunday night, and we had plans to watch something, and I just remember leaving the house that night, and I just said, I have to leave right now. I was like, I cannot wait until the end of April. I said, I have to leave right now, because if I don't, we're going to get back together, and I'm going to stay in this life and in this cycle.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the turning point. And I kind of told my mom, and I was like, "Hey, okay, change of plans." And she was like, "That's fine." She was like, "I'll be there. We can be there Wednesday morning." And that was, it was Sunday that night. So That was 3 days later. She was like, "We'll be there." And
And I think she was it like 6 in the morning. She's like, "We'll be there at 6 a.m."
yeah, I was like, "Geez, okay, cool."
She
But
wasn't
yeah, it's
messing
like,
around. She's like, "We're gonna come
no,
rescue you."
no, she wasn't. So, I packed up everything, and they were there promptly at 6 a.m. And we packed everything up in the truck and in my car that we could, and we left all the big furniture, because again, my lease wasn't up until the end of April, so I had some time to get all that. But we just got the necessities out, and it was March 1st, 2023, when I moved back.
Mm. And so what? And then, and what was that like? So you started. I think you said you started like reading the Bible, listening to Christian music, reading Christian books. Like, what happened when you got back home?
Yeah, so, well, even before I left Atlanta, I was starting to listen to sermons and podcasts. My church, Rinkin Church of God podcast, I was listening to, and Jensen Franklin's podcast I was listening to, because Jensen had a big impact on my life, as in the youth group. So I knew that those were like trusted voices. So
Hmm.
I listened to those podcasts, and I started listening to Christian music again. And man, talking about just how soft and sensitive my heart was. I no lie, Beckett. It was like on a podcast, like somebody could get up and just say good morning, and I would just start bawling. It was like it was the craziest thing. And it was like,
Yeah.
whenever I heard the music too, it was like I didn't even need to hear the words, just knowing that it was Christian music and just like a note from a piano, and I was just like just sobbing in tears.
The same
It
thing
was
with me
so,
when I first got saved. Like I would listen to a sermon, I would just like start bawling, or listen the same exact thing. I would just
yeah,
get like for this happened for I don't know how long, a couple of years, or maybe at least a year, but maybe longer.
yeah,
Because it was all so new and it was all so just I was like, like I feel like free finally, like I'm truly free in Christ, and it just all these things just hit me hard. Um,
yeah,
so yeah, I get that. And so what happened?
yeah.
And then you also you got home and um, you started. I mean, you changed your number, right?
Yeah, and that was something I knew that I was going to have to do whenever I moved. I had decided that I was going to change my number, and I had talked about getting rid of, all my social media and just completely going like off the grid. Um, but I did change my number just because I wasn't sure how what this was going to be. I knew what I needed to do, but I didn't know what that looked like. And I didn't know what I would struggle with when I moved, like what I would carry from my past, or what I would try to keep holding on to from my past. But I knew that there needed to be a clear division. And I did change my number, and I started slowly letting some people in. I ended up keeping my social media. I realized that that wasn't really a big issue for me. Um, but I think a lot of, early on, it was very much a learning curve, and it was very difficult, to cut ties with certain people. These are relationships, just like,
Yeah,
anything, friendships. These are deep rooted, 10, 12, 13-year relationships and friendships. I'd gone through life with these people, so that got a little easier. I mean, I think the first 6 months of being back was extremely difficult. But you know what? I would do it all again. It was really early on when I moved back. There was a guest speaker at my church, and I remember he said something. He said, God will never ask you to get rid of something that he's not ready to replace with something better.
mm,
And I just remember holding on to that, and it brought me so much encouragement. And it was tough at first, but again, I would do it all over if I had to. Is It was. everything to gain, you know?
Yeah, I always say, I mean, everything in this life pales in comparison to a relationship with the King of the universe, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
It just all pales in comparison. And what would you? So, how are you? I mean, how are you feeling today? Like, how do you? How's your life going now?
My life is going well. I'm in school. I'm back in school, which is something I never said that I would ever do again. I thought that I dropped out shortly after I came out of the closet. Um, and I just, since then, I was just like, you know what, school's just not for me. College just isn't for me. But since then, I'm going back. And then I'm working completely different than the restaurant industry because I just didn't want to get sucked back into that environment and that atmosphere.
Hmm.
So I wanted to try something different. I got a job at UPS, which kind of, I mean, God's hand has been so evident in my life in the past 2 years. There are so many things that he has done and worked together that is just it's mind blowing. And it's overwhelming to think about it all. But I know for sure that I'm where I need to be right now. I think there's still a lot of healing. And but overall, I think the worst has gone. The hardest parts of this whole transformation, I think, with leaving that life behind is the hardest parts are behind me. And I'm just so
Yeah,
excited and grateful for just how patient and how faithful he is, and just so excited for what he has for me. It's really amazing to see and to obviously be a part of it. But
yeah. It's yeah. I mean, it's life is so much better in the kingdom of God than not being in the kingdom. It's just so everything is so much brighter and sweeter and more
yeah,
exciting. It's like the most exciting thing to be a part of. It really is. Like it's
yeah.
just like so. What? This is my last question. What would you tell people who are watching? Maybe there's a gay guy who's watching, maybe or a lesbian, whatever. What would you say to them right now?
Oh man. I think the biggest hang up for someone trying to leave that life is their attraction and their desire, their same-sex desires.
Hmm.
And something I've learned early on is, I don't have all the answers. I don't know all the answers, and I may never know the answers, and that's okay. I know that God gives me what I need and when I need it. Um, but I would just say to them that, for me, heterosexuality is not my goal. So if you're getting stuck on who you're attracted to or what your life looks like after this, heterosexuality is not my goal. To be more Christ-like and to follow God is my goal.
Right.
And, again, I don't have all the answers, but and I still struggle with those same-sex attractions. And I just am confident that he will, if I keep my eyes up on him, everything else is going to fall into place. And if I come back from that, if I or those desires are gone or taken away from me, I'll just consider it a blessing and a gift,
Hmm.
because again, my goal is to be more Christ-like. And again, I'll just go back to, he will never ask you to give anything that he's not ready to replace with something better. And I have known that to be true. Everything that I have given up, I have received so much more in
Hmm.
different areas than I ever imagined. Um,
Yeah.
so
Amazing.
I hope, yeah.
So, Josh, I'm so happy for you. I'm so glad that you're in the kingdom of God. I'm so glad you have eternal life, which is kind of a big deal. And thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it's going to be really powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beckett.